What an honor to be able to take the floor in front of maybe 4,000 people to defend peace, a central issue in this time. Friends, internationalism is alive and kicking. Every day we hear about international campaigns, but there is an international campaign for workers and for people. War, colonial war, genocide in Gaza, invasion war in Ukraine, 30 years war in Congo, where the resources are being plundered. War between two fractions of the army that are destroying the country in Sudan. It's a long list. We have 161 armed conflicts in the world, a record since World War II. The threat of a war between major powers with nuclear weapons is back on under the limelight. This goes along with the uninterrupted expenses for weapons in the last 10 years. How did we come to this? I'm sorry, I'm not going to bore you and depress you with this history, but in the dominating ideology, there is a very simple explanation. Authoritarian regimes such as Russian, Chinese, and a number of non-governmental players, non-Western players, are moved by the hate for our values and free world. From Ukraine to the Near East, the challenge here is to fight barbarians. Western leaders are allowing the first genocide in the 21st century to take place in Gaza, supposedly to defend democracy. But they despise the symbolic attempts to help the Gazan population. What they don't see is that even though the flotilla is not docking, the message is there. We are not complicit with the genocide. Right now, our thoughts go to the Gazan populations and the flotilla activists who have been jailed by Israel. Some of them are members of parliament for La France Insoumise. Shame to the French government doing nothing to obtain their release, when others already have tried their best to get them to be released. Shame on the people who are complicit with the genocide. How did this happen? Only a materialistic interpretation will allow us to free ourselves from identity interpretation, right or wing or left. What we are going through is the end of neoliberal globalization, the end of free trade and dollar financing that allowed, ever since the dollar was no longer convertible in gold, to restart the hegemony of the American state. But this was made possible by an empire based on ideological and financial dominance in the 90s, and the Americans who claim to control the unipolar world brings the story to an end. And the idea according to which liberal democracy and the world economy is imposing itself on the other countries and bringing about peace. Now, this so-called happy globalization led to a social war. 1980, 2022, the share of salaries in added value has gone down in developed countries, and from 62 to 49 in developing countries. This is what we call class war. And national oligarchies have profited, and those holding the capital, who wanted to decrease production costs, led to workers being exploited in some places and other countries being deindustrialized, and this was sooner or later going to be made public. Globalization initially was an armed globalization. The American war was bloody for the Iraqi population initially, and ever since the Americans came to Europe at the end of the Second World War, we have understood that NATO enlargement was the priority. We now understand the consequences. And then the enemy continued with the war on terrorism following 9/11. Neoconservationists have led the United States to wage a continuous war, and this is disastrous for the rest of the world, including the United States, including also for those, except for those who had the shares in the weapons industry. And this led to a civilization shock that is being interpreted, and it has restarted across the world a racist colonialism movement. The interpreting will not allow us to understand why nowadays our leaders are saying nothing or even approving what is happening in Gaza. The identity movement and authority movement that we have just witnessed is coming from very far away. In 2008, for those who remember, the subprime crisis actually accelerated the destruction of the United States hegemony and the collective safety built around the UN, and it led to accelerating the war on nature, which leads to another number of wars because capitalism prevents us from fighting together the climate crisis. In the meantime, between the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, both based on limitations to the Russian capitalism and the colonial war from Israel and Gaza, these movements have only been exacerbated. The war economy is shown as the only possible response to Russia invading Ukraine. But this war economy can be accounted for by the fact that after decades of industrialization, the weapons, the armament industry has become in France like one of the biggest industries, and it's the only industrial sector that can lead the economy. The war economy is therefore a new form of capitalism. I have no nostalgia from the former form of capitalism, but the next is even worse than the previous one because it's based on war. It rests on imperialist campaigns. We no longer pretend that we pay respect sovereignty. When Trump says, Greenland belongs to me, I will help Ukraine if they give men their rare metals, and I will help anyone who continues to plunder the resources. This is purely imperialism at play. And the situation is even more dangerous if we consider that after losing their economic supremacy, the United States are now seeing their monetary domination being discussed by the BRICS. And they can only rest on their military supremacy. Finally, the identity and racist vision of the world has been released by the beginning of the Gazan genocide, fighting Islamic or leftist movements. And this is only based on the attempt to create internal enemies. Every day we have new internal enemies. This is what fascism is all about. Yes, peace, both civilian and international, is an emergency, and La France Insoumise has decided this would be the main axis of our fight. For years we have been carrying out inter-world diplomacy, and we rest our policy on a number of pillars. First of all, defending peace means that we must remind people that all lives have the same value. There are differences in political and religion regimes, but we have to have common rules because that's the base of our common humanity. And therefore, we defend the use of diplomacy and international law, although they have limitation. When the leaders refuse to apply the rules, the problems are not the rules, the problems are the leaders. So how do we accept that we can give sanctions to Russia but not to Israel when Israel is perpetrating a genocide that we see live on our TVs? The whole world is seeing the moral failure of a Western set of countries with no more credibility. The only thing we can do is negotiate with those who are not our friends. I mean, that's the whole point, and that's at the bottom of diplomacy. The G7 group is totally up to their armpits in trouble. And when there is a genocide, the sanctions should have been applied immediately, universally. So shame on the French government who gave guarantees to Netanyahu. We are going to continue advocating for a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine because there is no military outcome possible or acceptable to this war. Likewise, we will continue to demand sanctions against Israel. We want to break the economic ties between the EU and Israel, and this is part of the motion that our comrades are going to defend in the European Parliament next week. And we want to bring the genocidal leaders in front of a court. We are refusing to go into a permanent military alliance, starting with NATO, because the alliance members cover 70% of the world military expenses. We refuse to follow the US in the logic they want to impose on us. If we come to the power, we will not pay the tribute asked by Trump, 5% of our GDP for military expenses on the European level. Yes, we refuse to be dragged into war logics that we don't belong to, neither the American nor ours, nor anyone else's. In the Asian Pacific area, we refuse to fight against China in a military alliance. And this means that the UN is the only legitimate player for our collective security. We must talk to everybody, and not just Western countries, and the only way to do it is within the UN. But when the leaders do not respect the UN rules, the issue is not the UN. The issue are the leaders. So we need to talk to everybody. And that has always been the case for the international family we belong to. But it's all the more an emergency now because the Western world is no longer the center of the world. And that's even better. Defending peace means that we have to fight capitalism on the national level, but also at the international level. I am referring to what we understood from autumn globalization. We know that nothing is possible if the people don't unite. I am thinking of the claims that are the starting point for demonstrations or citizen revolutions that have been in our history in the last 15 years. Tunisia, Thailand, Chile, Lebanon, Burkina Faso, France with the yellow vests, Wall Street, Madagascar, Nepal, Morocco. Everywhere the people are protesting and fighting. Of course, beyond the different situation, every national situation is different. We all reject the consequences of neoliberal globalization. We want good wealth to be shared. And everywhere there is a revolution, there is a counter-revolution, especially when nobody is there on the left wing to fight the popular protest. Everywhere, the capital prefers a fascist response to popular and anti-capitalistic protests. But we want to continue claiming this. Peace means that we fight against injustice, the wealth of only a few people in our societies. We want to defend the rights of workers. This is not new. I mean, this was already the slogan of the International Workers' Organization that was founded after the Second World War, and in which we found a few remnants of the Grande Internationale. We are in an era when it is our duty to fight the fight without giving anything to the enemies of peace. Thank you.